There is a room somewhere inside the private residential apartments of the British royal family where something happened in 2024 that the palace will never officially confirm and that Harry will never officially acknowledge. A conversation between a father and his eldest son, between a king fighting cancer and a future king who had spent the better part of 4 years navigating the simultaneous collapse of his family's unity and the accelerated inheritance of its institutional weight. We do not know exactly when it happened. We do not know exactly what was said. We will not know because the people in that room will not tell us, and the institution they represent will manage the story of that conversation the way it manages every story that truly matters. But we know it happened, because the evidence of its outcome is visible in everything that followed. In the way Charles and William appeared together in public from mid-2024 onward, the body language of two people who have reached a new understanding, rather than simply performing a required proximity. In the way Kate, who brought her own shattering vulnerability to 2024, her own cancer, her own fight, became the human bridge across which a father and son found their way back to each other. In this way, the monarchy closed ranks in 2024 with a unity it had not managed since before the Sussex crisis began tearing it apart at the seams. And in the way that unity, warm, genuine, earned through shared suffering, drew a line around the people inside the room and away from the person who was not there. Harry. Tonight, we reconstructed the reconciliation that nobody announced. We forensically examine the private repair that changed the royal family's internal architecture permanently. And we explain, in precise and unflinching terms, why the deepest consequence of that reconciliation is not the peace it created. It is the door that is permanently closed. If you are new to this channel, welcome. What we do here is not speculation. It is not gossip dressed up in authoritative language. It is forensic royal commentary, the methodical, sourced, structured analysis of what is actually happening inside an institution that has survived for 1,000 years by making sure that what is actually happening is never fully visible to the public. We strip back the PR. We interrogate the silences. We follow the evidence to conclusions that the mainstream royal commentariat is either too comfortable or too conflicted to reach. And if that is the kind of unfiltered, unmanaged truth you came here for, subscribe right now, because what is coming in this video and the two that follow it is the most significant royal analysis this channel has ever produced. Now, let us begin with what you need to understand before any of the rest of this makes sense. The public narrative of the Sussex crisis was an enormous, exhausting, years-long saga that consumed the British media, and significant portions of the global conversation about the monarchy focused almost entirely on Harry and Meghan, on their departure, on the Oprah interview, on the Netflix documentary, on the legal campaigns and the memoir, and the sustained strategic dismantling of the institutional narrative from 5,000 miles away in California. What that public narrative almost entirely obscured was a secondary fracture. Quieter, less photogenic, less suited to the kind of dramatic storytelling that the Sussex saga generated. But arguably, and I want to be precise here because precision matters when we are talking about the long-term structural health of an institution, arguably more consequential. The fracture between Charles and William. Sources close to both households, and this is documented, this is drawn from multiple credible accounts across multiple reputable publications over multiple years, describe the period from 2020 through to Charles's accession in September 2022 as one of sustained, serious, behind-closed-doors tension between father and son. The tensions were multiple and layered. And to understand the significance of what was eventually repaired, you need to understand precisely what was broken. William believed, and sources suggest this belief was held with considerable force, that Charles's handling of Harry's departure was insufficiently robust. That Charles's instinct to manage, to find a middle ground, to leave doors open, to keep the emotional and institutional relationship with his younger son alive, even as that younger son was publicly attacking the institution from abroad, all of that, in William's assessment, had allowed the Sussex crisis to metastasize in ways that a cleaner, earlier, firmer institutional response could have prevented. William's view of the Megxit situation was reportedly binary from very early on. Harry and Meghan had made their choice. A sovereign choice, a legitimate choice, but a choice with consequences. And the institution's response to that choice should be clear, consistent, and without ambiguity. Every subsequent accommodation, every half-open door, every suggestion that Harry might find some hybrid role, every indication that the institutional response was negotiable, in William's assessment, every single one of those signals prolonged the crisis and damaged the crown. Charles's approach was, by contrast, emotionally complex. He was a father watching two sons diverge along lines that he did not have the tools, personal or institutional, to redirect. He was a man who had spent decades being managed and constrained by the institution himself, who understood, from long and painful personal experience, what it felt like to be inside a system that left limited room for individual, authentic expression. His response to Harry was never fully institutional. It was always, underneath the palace management and the private secretary communications and the carefully worded public statements, also personal. Also the response of a father who did not want to lose his son. This difference in fundamental approach, William's institutional clarity versus Charles's emotional complexity, created real and lasting tension. Sources describe William as genuinely frustrated with Charles's handling of the Harry situation throughout 2020 and 2021. Described meetings between the households of Kensington Palace and Clarence House that were professionally correct but personally cool. Describe a father-son relationship that had contracted into something managed, formal, and careful in a way it had not been, even in the difficult years of William's childhood. And underneath all of that, managed, formal caution, never fully resolved, never fully surfaced between two men who are both, by nature and by training, emotionally guarded, was the oldest wound. Diana. Charles was the man who had caused William's mother suffering, who had conducted an affair that fractured a marriage, who had been part of a dynamic that unfolded, through its various painful stages, into a Paris tunnel on a late August night in 1997, when William was 15 years old. William was the boy who had grown up carrying that, who had, publicly and privately, and over years and decades, done the institutional work of managing the relationship with his father that royal duty required, who appeared alongside him at public events, who completed the expected formalities, who performed the required family unity for the cameras that are always present whenever the royal family appears in public, but who had never, and this is where the sources are consistent and credible, never fully made peace with it. Not in the way that would allow complete, unheld, genuine trust between a father and a son. There was always, beneath the surface of their public relationship, something that had not been spoken, something that sat between them in rooms and meetings and the organised proximity of royal life. The reconciliation that happened in 2024 did not begin with a grand gesture, did not begin with a formal sit-down conversation about old grievances and unprocessed losses, did not begin with the intervention of a therapist or a trusted intermediary, or a well-meaning member of the extended family. It began with cancer, and with the specific, devastating, completely unmanageable human reality of two people simultaneously, separately, terrifyingly confronting the same existential truth: that they were not invulnerable, that they were not permanent, that the time available to them to resolve what had not been resolved was not actually unlimited. February the 5th, 2024. Charles's cancer diagnosis is announced to the public. March the 22nd, 2024. Kate reveals her own cancer diagnosis in that video, that extraordinary, quietly devastating video that she filmed in a garden, sitting in afternoon light, telling the world something that she had been carrying privately for weeks, while the public speculated endlessly, and in many cases disgracefully, about where she was and what was happening to her. 6 weeks. 2 cancer diagnoses in the same family. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Because the numbers and the timeline are so stark and so close together that it is easy to process them as information, as data points in a narrative, rather than as the human catastrophe they represented for the people living inside them. 6 weeks. The woman William chose. The man who raised him. Cancer. Both of them. William, who had already been managing his father's illness, alongside his expanding operational responsibilities as Prince of Wales, who had already been absorbing more and more of the institutional weight as Charles underwent treatment and reduced his public schedule, suddenly faced something that no institutional preparation, no years of royal training, no degree of personal discipline and emotional management could adequately address. His wife. Code. The person who is not his future queen, or his communications partner, or his institutional co-pilot, but the person he chose entirely personally, above and beyond every other consideration, fighting cancer. And his father, the man he had complex, unresolved, decades-long feelings about, fighting cancer at the same time. Sources close to William describe this period, late February through April 2024, as the most personally challenging of his adult life. Here was a man holding together an institution, a marriage, a family, and his own emotional interior. Simultaneously. Without visible fracture. Without the luxury of a public breakdown or a retreat from responsibility, or any of the options that a private person facing the same circumstances might have taken. He did not have those options. Because he is who he is. Because the institution requires what it requires. And it was in this period, this specific, extraordinary, shared suffering period, that no palace communications team planned for, and no royal crisis management playbook contained, that the William-Charles relationship shifted. Because Charles, facing his own mortality, did something that the institution does not easily accommodate and does not naturally produce. He reached toward his son. Not institutionally. Not through the careful choreography of private secretaries and scheduled meetings and the layered protocol that governs even the most intimate family interactions inside royal life. Personally. Directly. As a father to a son who was carrying more than any person should reasonably be asked to carry. Sources describe Charles making time in the margins of his own treatment, in the brief, clear periods between medical appointments and the profound fatigue that cancer treatment imposes on the body, to be present for William in a way that their relationship had not consistently accommodated across the adult years. To ask about Kate. Not in the polished, managed way of royal family communication, but genuinely, personally. To sit with the fear rather than managing it into something more palatably institutional. To be, briefly and genuinely, a father rather than a king. And William, who had been waiting, without fully knowing he was waiting, for precisely this quality of presence from his father, received it. Kate was the bridge. Her vulnerability, her extraordinary openness in that March video about the fear and the processing time she had needed, and the care she had taken to tell her children, created a space inside the royal family where emotional honesty was briefly, genuinely permitted. Where the management dropped. Where the institutional guard lowered. Where the people behind the protocol were, for a compressed and terrible and strangely clarifying period, simply people. And in that space, created not by any strategic decision, but by a woman's courage in confronting her own illness with public honesty, a father and son found their way to a conversation they had needed to have for years. We do not know what was said. We will not know, because the people in that room are not going to tell us, and no leaked account will ever fully capture the truth of a moment like that. But the outcome is visible. The Charles-William relationship that emerged from the spring and summer of 2024 is warmer, more trusting, more genuinely aligned than at any point in recent memory. It is visible in their public appearances together. It is visible in the body language, and body language between people who have been performing a required proximity for years looks distinctly different from body language between people who have actually repaired something. Any close observer can see the difference. It is not subtle. And with that warmth, with that genuine, hard-won, suffering-forged reconnection, came a clarity about the future of the monarchy that both men now share. A clarity that has hardened into an institutional position on the question of Harry that is more definitive than anything that came before it. And this is the part of tonight's analysis that matters most. This is the forensic conclusion that the rest of this video has been building toward. Here is what the Charles-William reconciliation means for Harry. And I want to be precise, because this is important. Before the reconciliation, during the period of genuine tension and managed distance between Charles and William, there existed, at least theoretically, a structural possibility for Harry. Not a comfortable path back. Not a warmly received one. But a possibility rooted in the simple reality that as long as Charles and William were not in full alignment about Harry's future, Harry's status was not entirely fixed. It was a live variable, a point of internal family tension that had not fully resolved itself into a permanent institutional position. If Charles wanted Harry back in some form, and the evidence across 2021 and 2022 suggests Charles did maintain that hope, did keep that door fractionally open, and if William's opposition to any such accommodation was strong enough to create a genuine and unresolved conflict between them on the question, then Harry existed in a space of institutional uncertainty. Uncomfortable. Distant. But not definitively closed. The reconciliation of 2024 eliminated that space entirely. Because when Charles and William made their peace, when the shared experience of illness and fear and the genuine emotional reconnection of a father and son in crisis repaired what had been damaged between them, they did not reach that peace through a negotiation about Harry. They did not sit in a room and haggle over what role, if any, the Duke of Sussex might play in a future monarchy. They reached it through a shared and deeply personal understanding of what this institution needs to survive. What it costs to maintain, what it requires of the people who carry it. And that understanding, refined in the specific and extraordinary crucible of 2024, where both men were confronting mortality, while simultaneously bearing the full operational weight of the crown, left no room for ambiguity. The Charles-William consensus on Harry in 2025 can be summarised as follows. Harry made his choice. The institution respected that choice by allowing him to leave on terms that were considerably more accommodating than strict royal protocol required or precedent supported. The institution has not closed the door on a personal family relationship. Charles has maintained contact with Harry, and sources suggest those calls, while infrequent, remain open. But the institutional door to any form of working royal role, any form of official accommodation, any formal reintegration of Harry into the operational machinery of the monarchy, that door is closed. Not locked in anger. Not barred as punishment. Simply closed. Quietly. Permanently. Because the monarchy that Charles and William are building together, the slimmed-down, operationally focused, scandal-resistant institution that their reconciliation has given both men the renewed shared conviction to construct, does not have a structural place for a duke who filed lawsuits against the British establishment from a mansion in Montecito. Does not have the institutional tolerance for the contradictions that Harry's presence, in any capacity, would introduce into a narrative that has worked very hard to stabilise itself. The peace between Charles and William has a price. Harry is the price. Not deliberately, not maliciously designed to punish him. Not the product of anger or personal vendetta dressed up in institutional language, but structurally, inevitably, as the logical outcome of two men deciding together in the most human and least institutional way possible what kind of monarchy they want to build and what kind of legacy they want to leave. And Kate, whose illness created the space in which that decision could be made with warmth rather than warfare, with genuine connection rather than institutional calculation, has emerged from 2024 as something she was not before. Not just the future queen. Not just William's partner in the long institutional project of modernising the crown. The emotional architect of a royal family that now has a clear centre, a clear direction, and a clearly defined boundary between those who are inside it and those who are not. Her cancer, her openness about it, the grace and the precision with which she managed its public dimension, the way she controlled her own story in a system that had always sought to control it for her, did something that years of institutional management could not achieve. It made the royal family human. And in making them human, in allowing the public a genuine glimpse of the fear and the vulnerability and the love underneath the ceremonial surface, it made the boundary between inside and outside not a political line drawn by advisers and private secretaries. It made it an emotional one, drawn by shared experience, by shared suffering, by the specific and irreplaceable bond that forms between people who have been through something together that cannot be performed or managed or retrospectively claimed. That is the hardest kind of boundary to challenge. You cannot file a lawsuit against the grief shared between a father and son over a hospital corridor. You cannot mount a legal challenge against the bond formed between two people who simultaneously watched the people they love most face cancer. You cannot issue a public statement that repositions you inside a family reconciliation you were not present for. Harry's exclusion from the 2024 reconciliation is not a palace decision. There was no meeting at which senior advisers decided to exclude him. There was no strategic document produced by the communications team that mapped out his permanent marginalisation. It is a family reality. The organic, painful, entirely human outcome of a family that repaired itself around the people who were present, and in doing so defined the shape of an absence. And that, more than any court ruling, any property dispute, any sealed will, any institutional edict, is what makes Harry's return genuinely, structurally, humanly impossible. Because you can challenge an institution. You can litigate against a system. You can mount a public argument against a decision made by advisers operating in their institutional capacity. But you cannot argue your way into a room where two people found each other again in the middle of the hardest year of their lives. You cannot legislate yourself into a family bond forged in a hospital waiting room. You can only watch from outside and understand, if you are honest enough to do so, that the door that closed was not slammed. It closed gently, with grief on both sides, and it will not open again. Here is the truth that this entire analysis has been building toward. The British monarchy's survival is not guaranteed by its constitution, its extraordinary property portfolio, its centuries of accumulated institutional prestige, or its position at the ceremonial apex of the British state. It is guaranteed by one thing only: by people choosing, in the face of illness, loss, complexity, public hostility, and the full and unrelenting weight of everything the institution asks of them, to stay. Charles stayed. Through decades of public opprobrium. Through a marriage that destroyed his reputation for a generation. Through the impossible and privately devastating grief of watching a former wife die, while the public directed its anger at him for it. He stayed. He served. He waited. He became, finally, the king he had spent his entire adult life preparing to be. William stayed. Through the loss of his mother at 12 years old. Through the years of being heir in waiting, while the world watched and speculated and intruded. Through a family crisis that fractured everything around him and required him, simultaneously, to manage his own grief, protect his children, support his wife, and maintain the institutional composure that his position demanded. He stayed. He served. He prepared. Kate stayed. Through the years of tabloid intrusion before her marriage, through the relentless and often cruel public scrutiny of royal life, through the impossible standard of perfection that the position of Princess of Wales has always imposed on the women who have held it. Through cancer. She stayed. She recovered. She came back. And in 2024, the three of them, bound together by shared suffering in ways that no institutional arrangement could manufacture and no communication strategy could replicate, made a collective choice. To build something together. Something smaller than what came before. Something more honest about what the monarchy is, what it costs, and what it genuinely requires of the people who carry it forward. Something that does not pretend the last decade of fracture and crisis and public damage did not happen, but that it absorbs all of it and moves forward anyway, with clear eyes and a shared purpose that has been tested in the only furnace that actually produces genuine conviction. Real suffering. Real loss. Real fear. And the choice, made on the other side of all of that, to remain. Harry made a different choice. And I want to be absolutely clear about this. It was his choice to make. Genuinely, legitimately, humanly his. No serious person disputes his right to have made it. No credible analysis of the Sussex story argues that Harry was obligated to remain inside a system he found suffocating and damaging. He chose. He left. He built a different life, on different terms, in a different country. But choices have consequences. And the consequence of Harry's choice, visible with total and unambiguous clarity in the aftermath of the 2024 reconciliation, is that the family that made peace did not make it around him. It made peace in the shape of his absence. And the monarchy that emerges from this period, the monarchy that William will formally assume when the time comes, that George will eventually inherit and carry into the second half of this century, that will bear the Windsor name forward into a world that is already profoundly different from the one that shaped the institution as we know it, will be built on the foundation of that peace. Not perfect. It will carry its secrets and its sealed documents and its institutional contradictions and its unresolved histories forward into the future, as institutions always do. Together. The people inside the room, together. And one man, 5,000 miles away. And here is the question I want to leave you with tonight. The human question that sits underneath all of the institutional analysis, the sourced commentary, the forensic reconstruction. Do you believe Harry truly understands, at the level below the public statements and the Netflix projects and the carefully managed external narrative, that what happened in 2024 between Charles and William was not a political manoeuvre designed to exclude him? That it was not a palace strategy? That it was not the product of advisors and briefing documents and institutional calculation dressed up as family warmth? Do you believe he understands that it was something far more painful than any of that? A genuine family repair. One that simply humanly, privately, irreversibly did not include him. And if he does understand it, somewhere beneath the public positioning and the stated confidence about his own choices and his own life, he genuinely understands what happened in that room and what it cost and what it closed. What do you think that knowledge costs him? That is the question I want you to write in the comments below. Not the institutional analysis. Not the political assessment of Harry's strategic options. The human answer. What does it cost a person to understand that the family they were born into made peace in the shape of their absence? Write that below. Because this is what this channel does differently from every other royal commentary you will find. We do not stop at the institution. We go through it to the human truth underneath. If this video gives you something to think about beyond the headlines and the managed narratives and the carefully curated royal press releases, then please like it right now and subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so. Because what is coming next are the final 2 videos of this series. Topics 19 and 20. And they zoom out further than anything we have done before. They ask the question that every other royal channel is either afraid to ask or not equipped to answer. Does the British monarchy survive the 21st century? Not as an abstract historical question. As a forensic, structured, evidence-based analysis of the specific pressures, institutional, political, generational, cultural, that the Crown now faces. And whether the repair that happened in 2024 is sufficient foundation to carry an ancient institution through a world that is changing faster than any monarchy has ever had to adapt to before. The answer will not be what you expect. Subscribe. Stay close. And prepare yourself. Because the final chapter of this series begins next.